What's up guys, so I'm going to be breaking down one of my samples called Veil, and it's going to be in my upcoming sample pack EQUINOX. It's a sample that's full of dynamics and it has very nice emotional sounding sections, but it also has that dark ambient undertone throughout. So I'm going to get straight to it and show you what I've done, what plugins I've used, why I've used them, how I've used them, and yeah, let's get straight to it. So this is what the intro sounds like. So it already gives you that sense that this is about to build to something. And often I like to put the most impactful part of the sample or the chorus right at the beginning. But also I like having intros that are a bit more low-key because it hints at something big coming. So the first layer is this. Now, I've really wanted to gatekeep this for a while, but it's called Neural Note. It's a free open source plugin, which basically allows you to drag in any audio file or sample, and it will give you the MIDI, which you can then just drag and drop into your DAW. Now, I wouldn't recommend obviously copy and pasting someone else's melody, but for the sake of inspiration and a starting point, I took one of Phantom 808's samples and just kind of flipped it around a bit. I messed with some of the notes, and then I put it into an Analog Lab preset called Blemish. This is from Keon's Multi-Key 4 kit. Great kit. I added some stock compression. I added the Valhalla Supermassive reverb and just a bit of halftime. I like to mess with the band so it gives it some of the halftime texture but not completely. And this was the progression that I got. Then I bounced that layer out, and what I got was these keys, which I then sound shifted. I brought up 8 semitones. I added some more halftime, again just decreasing the band a little bit, and added some of the stock compressor, added a multi-band compressor. And multi-band compression I cannot recommend enough for when you have multiple layers or clashing frequencies. This is essentially a way of sidechaining, so that, as you can see here, when I introduce the synth bass, which I'm going to show you after this is ducking where those lows are. So this gives a chance for the lower end frequencies from the synth bass to really shine. And then doing the opposite here, where when I boost here, that means I duck on something else. So definitely use a multi-band compressor if you can, and yeah, just kind of replicating that with an EQ here, tidying it up. And then the last thing I did was reversed it, and it sounded like this. Now, you don't really hear the stop here where I've cut it just because of the halftime. It's kind of carrying it over anyway. That's just why that's there. And then the next layer was these drums, or the percussive element. This was also from Phantom's Cremona kit, multi-kit. I added the sound shifter just to the point it sounded about right. I like to assume that drum perk loops are usually in C minor. I added the sound shifter, again stock compression, halftime, again decreasing the band. And then I've talked about this is a free plugin. It's called DH Flanger. It adds more width to it, which I really like, and it helps separate things so that layers aren't all in the exact same space. So this drum loop sounds like this. Very basic kind of pattern playing on the ride cymbal. And then I have this texture here, which I really like because it's small, but it just adds such a cool melodic component. And it's basically a snippet from a lead section I'd played, which I'll show you, but it sounds like this. And this texture came from another Analog Lab preset called Redeem. This is from Max Shooter and Keon's Analog Tools 3 kit. And if you hear the pattern here, so I literally just took that one note where it gave that cool texture and yeah, bounced that out, added some stock compressor, and Emergence, which is kind of like a plugin that replicates guitar pedals. It has so many parameters. Definitely check it out. I think it's free as well. And then just leading into the next section, I have this one little kind of swell or other texture, which you can see I've loaded it up with plugins, and it's because I created this track for another layer that comes later. But what I did was also just took this same texture I've just played for you and put it on here. Although this track has UAD compressor, EQ, just cutting out some of the harsh frequencies. I've got Pancake, so it pans. I've got Spectral Gate, which is a free plugin I'd definitely check out. It kind of helps just give you more of a mono kind of binaural texture. I can't really explain it, but do your research and look into this plugin. It's so worth it. And added some more compression. I added more EQ, boosting the sides. If you have FabFilter, you might be able to do this on other EQs as well, but I set the stereo placement to side, which can make a big difference when you're EQing. It's one thing to just boost and duck certain frequencies, but you can also boost the sides or just boost the mids. So it's really helpful for giving tracks their own space in a composition. And then I added some Portal, and I used this rhythmic octaves preset, and I just brought the mix down a little bit, and then I added some tape delay. Without any of the plugins, it sounds like this. And then with all the plugins, and it'll ring onto the next bit. So it's just a cool little ambient texture. So leading into the next section. So the only new layer in the end of this intro is this synth string layer, which comes in a little bit early, and it sounds like this. And this came from Sky Keys, which is a pretty awesome VST given that it's quite a cheap one as well. It's called Instant Nerves, and I added some compression, a little bit of halftime, again adjusting the band, added some delay, and I added some RC20 with a pretty high mix. This is from Drew Adu's RC Bank, and yeah, just adding some noise, magnetic. The thing I like about the magnetic, which I mentioned before, is using the dropouts. I never used to use this, but this just quite literally makes the audio drop out slightly depending on what you adjust it to, and then just put the EQ to focus on the high end. So it sounds like this. So you can hear how it's almost a bit broken, a bit wobbly, and it has that vinyl static to it. And you can also hear that kind of halftime lower end texture that gets added. So is what I did for this layer. So that is such a nice little intermediary section into the, what's going to be the crescendo of the sample. So the main thing was now I have these keys, the bell keys. God, they sound so good. And then that pause there creates anticipation, tension, and this came from basically taking that exact same pattern that I started with, and it's the OB6 preset by Keon from his multi-key 4 bank. And so here's a pattern and what it sounded like. And then I have this texture, which is actually from my upcoming texture and accent kit called Mirage, and without any processing, it sounds like this. And then with the sound shifter, just to make it the same as the key of the sample, added compression, I added even more compression, and then I added some delay, stock delay, and again the multi-band compressor just to duck and boost where necessary so it wasn't clashing with the other instruments. So I just like it. So it's almost like a brass type of texture, and I just like how it rings on. That's obviously because of the delay. And then what I have is this distorted synth, which sounds like this. And then that builds up, and that came from a Scorch preset called Awesome Source in the synth key section. Added compression, so some Valhalla Supermassive, and quite high mix as well, so it sounded very spacious and with a lot of reverb. I added some FabFilter Saturn, and this is just the brutal compressor preset. This just really kind of helped saturate and beef the sound up. And then again, some multi-band compression and some EQ just to tidy up the sound. So this is what it sounds like. This is from the next section. The last little bit that I have that alludes to the next section is this bit. So that's just accenting that Scorch layer where it's climbing up, and that came from an Analog Lab preset as well, and it went like this. And that was also just another Analog Lab preset from Keon's multi-key 4 kit called Island, and with some compression. Again, a lot of reverb and some halftime just to kind of make it more textured and introduce a bit more low end. It sounded like this. And so this was just basically copy and pasted, and together both running up sounded like this. So I just wanted to really emphasize that run, that crescendo up into the next section. Now, the first layer, which I just kind of played where the run happened, was from that same Analog Lab preset, and it just sounds like this. I chopped it up. So it's a very ambient texture, a very thin one, but it just sits nicely in the top end. And I added some of the UAD Rev E compressor, added some Pancake just so there was some movement. I brought down the mix a little bit, and the Cymatics Origin plugin just to give it a kind of tape vinyl-y effect and just cut out some of the highs here. All I did was just chop it up. I think I reversed a few of the layers. But it's really cool to just make ambient textures like this where you can kind of chop and just really process them a lot and then put them in the background, tuck them nicely into the high end or the low end, the mids. And yeah, just having thin, subtle textures like this really help fill out a sample without introducing so many new tracks of like, rather than using an instrument that takes up such a large frequency range, you can just fill out those little empty gaps with textures like this. So the next sound is the same layer as before, but I've made some adjustments and it sounds like this. I just love that progression so much, and all it was that main melody that I had on the keys, and I just reversed it, so when it's not reversed and without any of the processing, it sounds like this. So it's just the same bell key texture from before, but all I did was chop it in quarters, I reversed it, and then I added halftime again, just bringing down the mix so it wasn't the full halftime effect. I added a bunch of reverb, I added the spectral gate. Here's a good example of what it does and doesn't do. So without, and then with. So it makes it a lot kind of thinner and textured, and I keep using the word texture, but we're all about textures in these samples. That is a free plugin, so again, definitely check it out. I added compression, some EQ, just cutting out the lows so that didn't get in the way of the bass. I added RC20. I brought in quite a lot of noise with this one. I adjusted the reverb as well. Now I adjusted the width here the opposite so that it was quite mono and close sounding. So because I have layers that are already very, a lot of reverb, a lot of delay, they're very wide and taking those kind of far frequencies already. This just helped to like make it feel a bit closer, and it just helps it stand out a lot, especially in a section where a lot is happening now. And then I just added some Portal, which is the fourth shape pan preset, which I've talked about before. Just kind of gives it this quarter note chop effect, as well as a little bit of panning. And then we have the same distorted synth sound from before. So I just love how powerful that sounds. And then emphasizing that with this melody. And that came from Sky Keys. This was the same bank as before. So yeah, again, that was the Instant Nerves preset in Sky Keys with these plugins here. And then what I did is I took that same melody on the strings and then copied it over to that same distorted synth from Scorch, and I wanted to really emphasize that melody, so it really helped having the high end but also the low end doing that. So if you ever come up with a main melody, often I would emphasize that melody by just simply copy and pasting that layer into another track or instrument. And then the last layer is the synth bass from Analog Lab. It's called Bass Travi from Eza, and it's his Artillery Volume 2 kit, and the pattern just goes like this. So just taking that B and pitching it down an octave, that was the only variation there. And I just added some Saturn for a bit of distorted, well, saturation, basically. Then leading into the next section, all we really introduce is that percussive layer again. Taking out the keys, there's more space now. Strings back in. And then the track gets to breathe. So again, the only thing I did was introduce the drum element, and then I took out those keys so that it kind of gave more headroom, more space in those mids, in those highs. And then I added this kind of swelling texture, which I just chopped from the synth, and it sounds like this. And then this layer is from my upcoming texture kit called Mirage, and I just sound shifted it, 2 compressors. This is the one I showed you before. I've said this before, but I think it's so crucial that when you have a big section that crescendos, it's like the main chorus, that you give the listener, the producer, a chance to sort of breathe after that. And yeah, into the next section, which just really gives you a chance to breathe, I've just taken the drum elements, chopped them a little bit so they're a bit on and off, and then still keeping the synth with the little run and the keys. And the only thing I really want to note with this section is you hear the synth do this little run that's really off the grid, and that's because I did play it in. But even if you're just programming the notes in, I really try and stray away from quantizing everything these days and just giving it that human element. Listen to this with the metronome. Like, it's almost so off time, but that's what just makes it feel like you're almost watching a musician play it live, and they just kind of go into it when they want. Like, it just, I love that human element. And then into the next section. God, I love this main melody on the keys so much. This is really what it started with, was just taking that progression that I really liked, flipping it, and then putting it on an instrument that I think it sounded really good on. And then yeah, it's just the same textures from earlier, so it's repeating those motifs. There's that repetitive nature to the sample because you recognize or remember those textures from earlier. And yeah, just the same melodic components, the same little swell. And then I think in terms of arrangement for the outro, it's really helpful having it breathe right after the big crescendo and then slowly building energy again by adding the synth bass. It adds a bit more tension, aggression to it. And then yeah, this is the outro. I probably didn't need this section, but I just liked having that variation for any producer that's using this sample. There's a lot of different sections to pick from. This sounds more like a verse, which is fine because then this would loop back into the chorus really well. But yeah, guys, that's the breakdown of my sample Veil from my upcoming sample pack Equinox. It's going to be coming out later this December, and I had so much fun making this. Let me know if you learned anything, if there's anything you want to see, any comments, criticisms. I'm open to it all. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.